So I have been asked to speak on the ongoing nomenclature tussle, NAFLD versus MAFLD, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I thought I would have spoken my usual talk, which I have been speaking all over, between why NAFLD or why MAFLD. But I think Sanjay gave it a twist, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and that, I had to struggle with that. My disclosures, I'm committed to evidence-based science, aversion to evidence-based whataboutery. I'm chairman of the INASL task force on NAFLD, not MAFLD. And also I'm chairman of the Indian consortium on NAFLD, that is ICON D and not MAFLD. Besides, I have authored multiple NAFLD versus MAFLD rants. I use the word rants because that is what one of the editors of leading gastroenterology, hepatology journal had to write about my letter. So first, the good, and the good thing about this ongoing war, I call it a war, that there has been a huge spurt in activity in the NAFLD-related publications. They might have been, labeled as MAFLD, but basically most of it was, NAFLD-related. There is an increase in NAFLD-related CMEs, symposia, educational programs, including webinars. There has been an increase in awareness about NAFLD as an entity, as a disease, as an abnormality, and increased awareness and understanding of the pathogenesis of NAFLD also. All the ruckus started with this publication in Gastroenterology in 2020. MAFLD, a consensus-driven proposed nomenclature for metabolic-associated fatty liver disease. And you mark the two words, metabolic-associated. And here, the good thing about all this is that it's food for thought. When you think of a nomenclature change, you have to be very particular about the language you're using, the grammar you're using. You can't use wrong, and there's nothing, it is difficult to understand what is metabolic associated. So I call it a foot fault, whether it is basketball or whatever sports or badminton, you start on the wrong footing. And no sooner was this paper published, a major chunk of the authors of the previous paper, they deserted the rest. These included some of the leaders in NAFLD research in the world, global leaders, like Zubair, Professor Rinella, Professor Sanyal, Harrison, Brandt, Goodman, Cohen, and Rohit Lumba. They felt, though they were part of that same publication, they felt that from NAFLD to MAFLD, the implications of premature change, they call it premature. They were not happy with the change, and they had multiple reasons for this. And after going through all that, one thing is very clear, our understanding of NAFLD or MAFLD, whatever we may call that disease, the disease remains the same. A rose is a rose is a rose, whatever name you may give it. But we had, we were behaving like blind men who were trying to tell what the elephant is. Each one obsessed with one part of the pathogenic process, and it's a heterogeneous condition. We all know that. We all know the different, pathogenic mechanisms, the pathways involved in the pathogenesis of NAFLD or NASH, and yet we try to put it under one, with one name and tried. We said, the proponent said that they wanted to make it homogeneous. How can a change name make a heterogeneous condition homogeneous? This is the original poem about this elephant and the 6 blind men. And so these men of Hindustan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion exceeding stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right and all were in the wrong. So this led to a huge mess-like situation as far as NAFLD is concerned, and you can all see that in the various journals, the various articles. So from one hit, we came to 2 hits, and then we proceeded to multiple hits, and then all of a sudden, we say that we were all wrong. It's only one. It's only metabolism or dysmetabolism. There are so many pathways, genetic and so many gut and bile acid, insulin resistance. And yet we try to put it under one, we try to force it into that it is only a case of dysmetabolism. There lies the problem. The problem lies in the fact that MAFLD, the term MAFLD is a Western concept. People who have been fed on NAFLD is it's a hepatic manifestation of insulin resistance, of dysmetabolism and whatnot. So this sort of debate has been going on for years, but then all of a sudden they wanted a name change without knowing the implication. And they decided to put all their eggs in one basket. In our part of the world, we found that a lot of our patients do not have insulin resistance. Only half of our patients of NAFLD have insulin resistance. A number of them are lean. The first study I published in 2004, half of them were not overweight or obese. And when we sent this paper, this was published in 2015, our paper, but it took us about 3 years for the paper to get published. No one was willing to accept it. And we thought, well, what's wrong with it? Why other people are not noticing this? Why is it not happening in other parts of the world? And then we found this paper published from Bangladesh, where again, they found that in two-thirds of their patients, the insulin resistance was normal, and only in 1/3 of their patients had insulin resistance. So we were right. It is not that insulin resistance is the only factor responsible for pathogenesis. It is now becoming very clear because of this war, this tussle, that there are so many factors. Genetics. We all know how genes have a big role to play, not only in steatosis, but also in inflammation. There are genes involved in fibrosis, in the fibrotic process. But I'll talk about only one of the polymorphisms, that is the PNPLA3 polymorphism associated with NAFLD. And it has been seen that steatosis occurs in people in whom there is association independent of insulin resistance and the serum lipid concentration. The SNP-RS 738409 in PNPLA3 was not associated with insulin resistance. Then we have other environmental stressors responsible for NAFLD globally, not only in India, but more so in the developing world, where people are not overweight or obese and they do not have much of this metabolism, and yet you have NAFLD. And soft drink and smoking is one of the factors, independent of obesity, diabetes, and hyperlipidemia, to be related to the causation of NAFLD. In addition, there are other factors also, environmental stressors, especially pesticide exposure. You have now data that pesticide exposure, as well as environmental, even the particulate and environmental pollution, also can lead to NAFLD, increased NAFLD. Next, now bile acids have also been implicated in the pathogenesis of NAFLD. And increased serum bile acid levels seem to be independently associated with NASH, especially in non-diabetics. And this association is independent of insulin resistance. Gut microbiota, all of us know that there is an intricate relationship between gut dysbiosis and NAFLD. NAFLD has been found to be associated with the reduced abundance of several bacterial taxa independent of BMI and insulin resistance. NAFLD patients have higher concentrations of select fecal and serum metabolites, indicating a specific intestinal microbiome community. And last but not the least, circadian rhythm disruption has also been implicated in the pathogenesis of NAFLD, especially in the pathways involved in fibrosis. So many factors are involved. How can we just put it as, a case of, as a hepatic manifestation of this metabolism? That's not true. Again, back to my favorite animal, the elephant, and this is what we are. We are blind people trying to fix the blame on one pathway only. Besides the metabolism or the causation, today patient's perspective has become very important in nomenclature, in treatment, in guidelines and everything. And a lot of patient organizations have, suddenly they have started coming up all over the world. Some of their concerns are genuine, but many I have grave doubts about that. I know people will, eyebrows will be raised, but I have grave doubts. I saw this when I went to Chicago. I saw it, and I gave a piece of my mind to the person there. ELPA, that is the European Liver Patient Association, had expressed displeasure with the term NAFLD to the European Commission in 2018, and this was also mentioned in this publication in Gastroenterology. That was one of the reasons that the patients are not happy with the nomenclature, the majority of them. So I wrote to ELPA repeatedly, not once, not twice, thrice. How did they decide what percentage of patients were uncomfortable with this terminology, and whether the diverse pathogenesis of NAFLD, especially in non-Caucasians, was considered? ELPA just kept mum. There was no response. And the good thing about this was, it made me think, what do our patients, our own patients feel? Our patients in South Asia. We did a small study. NAFLD versus NAFLD, South Asian NAFLD patients don't favor name change. This study involved Indian NAFLD patients in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. It was published recently in the Journal of Eurasian Journal of Hepatogastroenterology. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah, there's some electrical disturbance, so that's why I was wondering what's gone wrong. Okay, so the other thing is the patient sentiments concerning NAFLD. 87% of our patients indicated that they were happy with the diagnosis of NAFLD. It controlled it because once they got this diagnosis, they were not bothered by the physicians, questioning them regarding whether they took alcohol or not. So they were very happy with this diagnosis. And hence, we have this to say from this study of ours, that the term NAFLD is comforting to patients, especially in South Asia, where alcohol is still taboo in most patients. And this terminology destigmatizes them and is acceptable to the majority of South Asian patients. NAFLD would favor, the term NAFLD would favor greater patient participation, not only in NAFLD research, but also in devising preventive strategy and programs, contrary to what patient group from the West have been claiming, but without doing any studies, without any basis. We did our own consensus meeting of the South Asian Association for Study of Liver and the Indian Association, and we had a meeting on 23rd of March this year. And this was what we have to say. The term NAFLD should not be changed to MAFLD. It was very clear. There was unanimity on this. And I should not be, at a very personal level, the good thing about this was we had a meeting. It was a wonderful meeting, very well planned, very well organized. It had representation from all parts of the globe. People were invited from different parts. People were there present in the meeting, and people were of Also, they are online participating in the meeting, and the concerns of all were discussed. This was held on 8th and 9th July, and the good thing was I got a chance to go to Chicago from Cuttack, and I participated actively in this. And the good thing about my presence there was I was the only person to raise the concerns of the hepatologists from South Asia as well as the patients from South Asia. So otherwise there was no representation. Actually, it took me 2 years of repeated writing and protesting that they ultimately invited me. Otherwise, APASL was invited. There were 4 representatives from APASL, including Professor Sareen. Only Professor Sareen had been there. The rest did not attend the meeting, though they were invited. And finally, the good thing is that I think this ongoing controversy, or whatever you may call it, whatever name you may give it, war, controversy, and this is not going to lead to, I am sure, I'm almost sure this is not going to be a requiem for NAFLD, but this is going to be a Ruvali, a clarion call for all of us to get together, to work together in the field of NAFLD. But the bad thing about it is that the brand NAFLD is going to take a setback. If you change the name, patients in South Asia are going to be stigmatized. Besides, the journals are full of unscientific reviews and ill-informed advocacy. This will lead to confusion among other stakeholders. It will lead to setback to research for pharmacotherapy instead of taking it forward. It would lead to research because a lot of work has been done in the field of biomarkers, non-invasive biomarkers, and this would again lead to sort of resetting of the whole thing and lead to a setback to research for biomarker. And lastly, I feel that this is going to lead to increased permissiveness to alcohol. And there are a large number of demerits, as I've already mentioned. It has taken almost a half a century. And we in India have been working, the task force has been formed in 2007. I was the chairperson of this task force, and numerous meetings have been taking place. And after all this, today people are taking notice. The other stakeholders, the endocrinologists, the cardiologists, physicians, GPs have started taking notice of NAFLD, right? It has taken tremendous amount of work on our part and the part of other researchers in the field of NAFLD. These are ICON D core team. And even the Indian government has become the first country in the world to identify the need for action for NAFLD. Not only that, it has already launched operational guidelines for integration of NAFLD with a national program for prevention and control of various important non-infectious diseases like cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and stroke. And now we talk of changing the name NAFLD. Fine, NAFLD is not optimal, but then changing it to another suboptimal term, leaving a great deal of ambiguity. This is going to have a negative impact on the field. It will create unnecessary confusion. It will lose its destigmatizing effect. And besides, as I've already mentioned about rebranding, this is going to go wrong. It has taken 50 years almost for this brand NAFLD to be established. And if we change it, it is going to affect the brand. Brand use seems inappropriate in medical academia, but we need to understand that changing in medical terminology is not all about academics. And that is why we need to be very cautious unless we have robust evidence, either pathogenetic or perceptive, and we must see that a name change should not deleteriously affect this brand NAFLD. Some of the worst corporate rebrands ever. Millions were spent for the new brands, like for Tropicana, the new brand. They have spent millions for this brand. Same thing with Gap, a clothes, apparel. Then with Netflix, they changed the Quickster. And all of them, in spite of the millions they spent, they had to go back. They had to go back to the original because they found that it affected the brand very badly. I'm afraid This might happen with NAFLD also. We have to be very careful this rebranding. I think NAFLD word should not be changed. Otherwise, if we change it, if we keep on changing it unnecessarily, tomorrow who knows, as it happened for St. Petersburg, which was changed to Leningrad, the people of this city voted it back to St. Petersburg. Then it is no more Leningrad after the fall of the communists. So name change is a very important thing which has to be done very carefully. You cannot decide it like a 100 sprint or a rockers boxing bout. It requires systematic brainstorming without any conflict of interest. The way it was done in Chicago, it should be inclusive. The process should honestly involve all stakeholders, and there is no role of prejudging here, criticizing before the whole process is over, criticizing for no just reason. Unfortunately, the ugly part of all this is that this has degenerated into a no-holds-barred scuffle. The opponents have dug into irretrievable, unrelenting positions in their bunkers. But for me and my group in INASL and SAASL, it's time to take the bull by the horns. As we mentioned in this letter, and mind you, when we sent this letter to Journal of Hepatology, when we sent the article, they said, no, we won't publish it. If you want, you send it as a letter. When you sent it as a letter, they said you can't have so many references. So the number of references were cut down. And then they said, okay, liberally that you can have 10 references. So, and to our shock, when we saw the response to this letter, in another letter, that letter had 37 references. So the playground is not level. This is not proper. And there is a lot of conflict of interest, even in the case of journals. And see, before the Chicago consensus thing is out, now see, people are threatening that if a consensus is reached, it can divide the world. And this is published only this month. And unfortunately, they write that this would divide the world. And who is trying to divide the world? And these are the last lines. These are the last lines of this article, the editorial. We acknowledge that comments are iconoclastic, but we believe them to be sensible. Yes. We conclude with a quote from Harvard economist John Galbraith. And this is the quote they have quoted. One of my greatest pleasures in my writing has come from the thought that perhaps my work might annoy someone of comfortably pretentious position. Then comes the realization that such people rarely read. I think this is height of conceit. And what does pretentious mean? They use pretentious. Someone trying to appear better or more important than is really the case. A pretentious snob. And if you are questioning the consensus being tried, it has taken 2 years. It's a slow process. That is their fault. They should have struck with speed. The way these consensus and other consensus were, cobbled up. What was the method followed for selection of participants here? How did they select? For reaching of consensus? And who was representing South Asia here? Next, when very soon, APASL had this one out, published. Why all the hurry? It amounted to a preemptive strike. But I would say this was jumping the gun. There are questions galore. What methodology was used by this group of APASL to replace NAFLD with MAFLD? How was the selection of the 23 experts? This is what these people raised in their editorial. And now I am raising the same questions. How was the selection of 23 experts who are shown as authors made? Why is there a preponderance of the Chinese among this group? 4 from China, 4 from Taiwan, that is 8, that is over 1/3. Over 1/3. Even countries like Philippines, Malaysia, Turkey, Egypt had 2 representatives each. Why was Indian hepatology literally kept out? India has a total population of 1567 billions. This is the capital of NAFLD. Why were we kept out? Why were the chairpersons and conveners of the INASL, the Indian National Association for Study of Liver Disease, Task Force on NAFLD and ICON-D kept out? And in the learned group of 23, there were only 2 Indians. The mover and shaker, a first author and his institutional subordinate. That's not done. Now let us look at the quality of this publication. Bangladesh has one of the highest rates of NAFLD in South Asia, they write. This is just an example. If you find most of this article is not on NAFLD, this review article, it should be the APASL guidelines for diagnosis and management of NAFLD rather, with slight changes. See, this is the paper they have quoted or cited for this. Bangladesh has one of the highest rates of NAFLD in South Asia. And what is the paper about? This paper is not about NAFLD, it's about NAFLD. 33.86% of people have NAFLD, they write. So how can you interchange this to bolster your demand for NAFLD? That is unscientific, and I think I would call it dishonesty. Changing nomenclature from NAFLD to MAFLD is not only premature but also confusing, as my colleague Dr. Duseja and Sunil Taneja from PGI Chandigarh would say. Changing nomenclature thus may cause potential clouding of the diagnostics and the drug development endeavors that will be left in the lurch, with further delay in getting a pharmacological solution that we honestly see. We need to chart the road ahead, recognize the vast heterogeneity of NAFLD across population and the presence of multiple pathophysiological pathways. We need to launch collaborative efforts worldwide to better understand the different facets and nuances of this intricate entity. We need to bolster treatment arsenal, especially we need to curb the NAFLD pandemic. The amount of energy, the amount of money, the amount of dollars spent on this so-called nomenclature. If a part of this would be spent upon prevention of NAFLD, it would be a big thing. Intellectual exercise is the need of the hour, not semantic juggling. I'm reminded of this quotation from Alice in Wonderland. Words mean what I want them to mean, said the Queen of Hearts. Such an attitude can have no place in the world of medicine. We need to be scientific. There is no scope of muscle flexing in science. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry if I've hurt some sentiment, but